The Holy Gospel of our Lord Jesus Christ according to Mark.
Glory to you, Lord Christ.
Jesus took with him Peter and James and John and led them up a high mountain apart by themselves. And he was transfigured before them, and his clothes became dazzling white, such as no one on earth could bleach them. And there appeared to them Elijah with Moses, who were talking with Jesus. Then Peter said to Jesus, "Rabbi, it is good for us to be here. Let us make 3 dwellings, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah." He did not know what to say, for they were terrified. Then a cloud overshadowed them, and from the cloud there came a voice, "This is my Son, the beloved. Listen to him." Suddenly, when they looked around, they saw no one with them anymore, but only Jesus. As they were coming down the mountain, he ordered them to tell no one about what they had seen until after the Son of Humanity had risen from the dead. The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, Lord Christ. Arise and shine, for your light has come, and the glory of the Lord is risen upon you.
Holy and gracious God, I speak in your name and in your presence, asking that my words would be pleasing to you, guided by your Spirit, and that the hearts and minds of your people would be open to you. Through Christ our Lord, I pray. Amen. So this morning is the last Sunday of the season of the Epiphany. And always we have the story of the Transfiguration on the last Sunday of Epiphany. And interestingly, the Feast of the Epiphany is celebrated in August, and so we have the story of the Epiphany again every August. I think it's the only story in the Gospels that we hear twice every year. And it's that significant of a story. And of course, it's fitting that it be the last Sunday of Epiphany because the Epiphany is the revealing or the manifestation of Christ, and this story is perhaps the most revealing of all the stories of who this Jesus really is. It also occurs at a very poignant time in Mark's Gospel, which you've been hearing us talk about the last several weeks. It comes from this central section in which things kind of heat up, and we see how dramatically the disciples just can't get what's going on. You've heard me say it several times, and you'll hear me say it again. You're going to hear me say it several times this morning. They cannot see. They cannot hear. Their hearts are hardened, and they cannot understand. And in this central section, that happens again and again and again. And then there's this moment of the Transfiguration in the midst of all of that, in which who Jesus really is, his glory is revealed, with Moses and Elijah. And the voice says, "Hear him." Not Moses, not Elijah, hear Jesus. Now, this section in Mark's Gospel is marked off by the healings of 2 blind people. It begins with the healing of a blind man, and it ends with the healing of a blind man. This section in Mark, it's about 3 chapters. And after the healing of the second blind man, then the story moves to Jesus in Jerusalem. Interestingly, the first blind guy that's healed it takes twice for Jesus to heal him. So this blind guy comes, and Jesus invites him to come forward and heal him, and Jesus prays for him and asks him, can you see? And he says, I see trees like men walking. So Jesus prays for him again. We call it the two-touch miracle. It's the only one in the Gospels. It's the only time that happens in the Gospels, that it takes Jesus twice to heal someone. Some of us think it's a metaphor for we need many touches. We need many touches to see, to hear, to have our hearts softened, and to understand. And again, the exclamation point is the section ends with another healing of a blind guy. So, the story of the Transfiguration, in the midst of all of that, Moses and Elijah appear. And there's wonderful symbolism in that, many layers. There's lots of connections in this story. Moses ascends on the mountain of Sinai to get the Ten Commandments, and God appears in a cloud. On the Mount of Transfiguration, a cloud comes, and in Elijah's life, he ascends up on the mountain, and he hears God in the sheer silence. When the cloud comes, everything quiets, and Elijah's story is about hearing God in the sheer silence. Moses is the giver of the Ten Commandments. Elijah is considered in Israel's history to be the greatest of the prophets. So Moses and Elijah, it could be argued, but they're really two of Israel's greatest heroes. And they're also appearing in glory, but the voice doesn't say, listen to them. It says, listen to Jesus. And I think it's a very intentional contrast. Something different has arrived. Now, in the midst of all this, they cannot hear Jesus. It's Jesus' invitation to lose your life to find your life. Over and over, that's what they just cannot understand. It's Jesus' invitation to a life of transformation rather than a life of success. Lose your life, find your life. Now, it's very interesting. And this gets hard. I have to say this, but I don't want to. That's the truth. There is a great life to be found. In the Mount of Transfiguration, there's a glorious life to be found. There is a resurrection life to be found. It's a great, abundant, I think, glorious life. But it's a life of service. It's a life of losing your life to find your life again and again and again and again. It's an upside down greatness, the life we're called to. So, Peter, of course, is Peter. Don't you love it? We're all so grateful we get Peter's story. At least I am so grateful. In this moment, Peter's very instructive. And I want us to hear it. I just really want to hone in on this. Peter's instructive because he is afraid. Now, all of them are afraid, but we're really talking about Peter. Mark says he's terrified. And out of his fear, he projects his religion. When Peter says, it's a great thing, let's stay up on the mountain. We'll build the tabernacle for Moses and for Elijah and for you, Jesus, and we'll all stay here. And, it actually could be perceived as humble because he doesn't say, we'll build tabernacles for us too. You guys will have tabernacles and we'll live out in the open. But he wants to stay there. And in Israel's story, there's lots of stories about tabernacles and about God dwelling in tabernacles and the celebration in tabernacle. Tabernacle it means tent. Lots of stories about that. And so, on the one hand, from his religion, Peter is exactly correct. Here we are on the holy mountain with Moses and Elijah and Jesus. And so let's stay here. The end time has come. God has come. We're on the mountain. The glory of the Lord is here. Let's stay here. Now, you guys, I'm going to be impolite, all right? I just want you, is that, what we need is for Peter to just shut up. And so do we. God's way is not to stay up here on this holy mountain. God's way is to go down the mountain and give your life. And that's where Jesus is going. And that's the way of God, and that's the way God always is. The God who gives everything away. The God who gives God's self away and invites us to follow in that life. And Peter, I think, is like all the rest of us. We have our answers. We have our religion. We think we know. And when we're afraid, we take all of that and project it onto what's happening, and then we can never learn anything new. One of my favorite sayings, one of my favorite questions is, can you let go of what you know to discover what you don't know? And all of us need to realize the answer to that question is no, I can't. I can't. And so, now interestingly, in Mark's gospel, it sounds like Peter finishes his statement, let us build 3 tabernacles, and then the cloud comes and the voice speaks from the cloud. It's not obvious or clear that's what's happening, but in both Matthew and Luke's gospel, while Peter is speaking, God talks. So the voice of God from the cloud walks all over Peter. Again, Peter, just shut up and listen, would you, buddy? Just let me talk. And the cloud comes and silences Peter. Matthew's gospel said when the cloud comes, they're so afraid they fall on their faces and just become silent. And then the voice from heaven speaks, and when it says, literally it says, hear Jesus. And I don't think it means his words, I think it means his life. Hear, see, follow this life. This one is the way. So, Thomas Keating has a great quote. And it sets us up beautifully for Lent. So today's the last Sunday of the Epiphany. We move into Lent. And I want to invite us to consider something for our Lenten journey. Thomas Keating says, silence is not the absence of noise, but the absence of resistance to God. See, what Peter doesn't know is that in his projecting his religion, he's resisting God. And he doesn't know that. I call it passive resistance. Out of his fear, he's reacting with what he already knows. I mean, I hear it all the time. Somebody asks a question and people just start quoting their theology. And I just go, okay, now let's talk. We're so quick because we're afraid. And of all things, our theology consoles our fear. We latch onto it, and then we never grow beyond it. And we don't realize in that we're resisting God. We're resisting the call and the invitation of the Spirit to keep growing, keep learning, keep moving into God, who is the ultimate mystery and will always have more to give us if we're willing to see and hear and have our hearts softened. and our minds, I think, actually enlarged. For our mind to grow and grow and grow into the mind of Christ. And again, it almost always backs into to give my life away. So, what I would like to invite us to do is to imagine how we can either begin a practice of silence or grow in our practice of silence. From time to time, you've heard me talk about silence and contemplative prayer and Christian meditation. And it's a wonderful, rich tradition in the Episcopal Church today. And frankly, all over Christendom in the last 30 or 40 years, the practice of contemplative prayer or silence or Christian meditation has been growing. And you know we have a robust contemplative program at St. Barnabas. So as you think about how you want to practice a Holy Lent this year, I'd like to invite you to consider how you can grow in the practice of silence. And I actually think there's lots of ways that we're invited to be silent. I think all human beings are contemplatives, whether they know it or not. And I don't mean that to sound, condescending or like I know everything or any of that. I just want to say that I think it's innate to the human person to want to have periods of quiet and rest and just be. Just be. And to the degree we can grasp it in our faith life, to just be in the presence of my God, to let myself go into my God, let go of all of my ambitions, and all of my fears, and all that I think I know, and my anxieties and my worry about this and this and this, and I'm thinking about this one all the time so the wrong thing doesn't happen, and I'm thinking about this one all the time so it gets successful, and just over and over and over, and all the stuff I'm latched onto. I think we desperately want periods where I can just let it go. Trust my God and let God have God's way with me. Let it all go and open myself to the possibility that my God might have a whole new revelation for me, a whole new path. And maybe it's little and maybe it's large. Who knows? But that I could have those times in my life. And however that might look for you. Now, I want to say that I think we can find silence in lots of ways, and I want to honor that. And I want to invite us to have silence in our prayer closet especially, to have appointments with our God, where I go into my prayer space, and in my prayer space, I learn, and we need help. And by the way, St. Barnabas has lots of ways to help. You'll hear about some of that in the announcements today. But that in my prayer closet, my space, I set aside time to just let it all go. Just be quiet. And by faith, not by what it feels like, not by what I think, but letting all that go, and by faith, sinking into Jesus' presence within me, and let Jesus have his way with me. I think we might discover that all of that stuff is a way of resisting the deep movements of the Spirit within me. And let all of that stuff go, and I might discover those deep movements are what I've been longing for. I just didn't know. The cloud came, and it all got quiet. And the voice said, "This is my beloved. Hear him." Amen.